The air in the elevator was thick with the cloying scent of expensive cologne and the silent hum of ambition. I smoothed down the seams of my charcoal gray suit, a ritualistic gesture that did little to quell the tremor in my hands. Today was the day. The culmination of years of grueling work, of late nights fueled by lukewarm coffee and sheer desperation, all leading to this moment. I was about to present my proposal to Elias Thorne, the titan of Thorne Industries, a man whose name was synonymous with ruthless efficiency and an impenetrable emotional fortress. My reflection in the polished steel doors offered little reassurance. My hair, usually a controlled cascade of dark waves, felt stubbornly unruly. My eyes, I suspected, held a flicker of apprehension that no amount of practiced composure could entirely mask. Elias Thorne. Even his name sounded like a decree. He was a legend, a phantom to most, a force of nature to those who had the misfortune of crossing his path. And I, Eleanor Vance, a relatively unknown consultant with a radical idea, was about to face him. The elevator doors slid open with a soft sigh, revealing a panorama of the city that stole my breath. Thorne Industries occupied the top 3 floors of the city's tallest skyscraper, a monument to Thorne's unwavering dominance. The reception area was a study in minimalist grandeur. White marble, abstract sculptures that defied interpretation, and a hushed reverence that hinted at the power residing within. A woman with a smile as sharp as a diamond greeted me, her voice smooth as silk. "Ms. Vance, Mr. Thorne is expecting you. Please, have a seat." I perched on the edge of a sleek, uncomfortable sofa, my briefcase resting on my lap like a shield. The silence amplified the frantic thumping of my heart. I'd rehearsed my pitch 1,000 times, dissected every potential question, anticipated every possible objection. Yet standing here, on the precipice of this encounter, a primal fear began to coil in my gut. Elias Thorne didn't just acquire businesses, he consumed them. He didn't just innovate, he reshaped industries with a single, decisive stroke. And I, with my fledgling proposal for sustainable urban development, felt like a tiny bird daring to peck at a granite mountain. My mind, unbidden, drifted to the stories. Whispers of Thorne's past, laced with tragedy and a self-imposed exile from anything resembling vulnerability. They said he'd lost someone who had irrevocably altered his ability to connect. They said he'd built these walls, brick by impenetrable brick, after that loss, vowing never to feel that depth of pain again. He'd said he'd never love again. The words echoed in my head, a chilling refrain that seemed to presage my own impending encounter with his legend. The sharp click of heels on marble announced my arrival. The receptionist, her professional mask firmly in place, gestured towards a large, ornate door. "Mr. Thorne will see you now." My legs felt heavy as I walked, each step a deliberate act of defiance against the urge to turn and flee. The door opened, revealing a space that was both awe-inspiring and intimidating. It was a boardroom, yes, but it was also a stage. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a breathtaking, if slightly dizzying, view of the city. The polished obsidian table gleamed, reflecting the muted light. And at the head of it, a figure emerged from the shadows, a silhouette against the panoramic cityscape. Elias Thorne. He rose slowly, deliberately, and for the first time, I saw him. He was taller than I'd imagined, his frame lean and powerful. His dark hair was impeccably styled, streaked with silver at the temples, hinting at the years he'd spent forging his empire. But it was his eyes that truly arrested me. They were the color of a stormy sea, a deep, intense blue that seemed to hold 1,000 unspoken stories. They were intelligent, sharp, and utterly devoid of warmth. They were the eyes of a man who had seen too much, lost too much, and built too many defenses. A jolt, sharp and unexpected, shot through me. It wasn't just admiration for his success or apprehension about my pitch. It was something else, something visceral and unsettling. Recognition. A faint, almost imperceptible spark of something I couldn't quite place. A ghost of a memory struggling to surface. He extended a hand, his grip firm and surprisingly cool. "Ms. Vance." "I presume?" His voice was a low baritone, resonant and devoid of any discernible emotion. "Yes, Mr. Thorne," I managed, my own voice a little breathy. "Thank you for seeing me." He released my hand, and I felt an almost physical withdrawal of his presence. He gestured to a chair opposite him. "Please, make yourself comfortable. Though I doubt comfort is your primary objective this afternoon." A faint, almost imperceptible hint of amusement touched the corners of his lips, a fleeting expression that vanished as quickly as it appeared. It was enough to make me realize that he was not simply a cold, unfeeling automaton. There was a mind at work behind those formidable eyes, a keen intellect that missed nothing. I sat, placing my briefcase on the table. The air crackled with unspoken tension. This was it. The moment of truth. I opened my briefcase, my fingers fumbling slightly with the latches. As I pulled out my presentation binder, a small, worn photograph slipped from its pages and landed on the polished table, directly in front of Elias Thorne. Time seemed to warp. The city lights blurred. The hum of the building faded. All I could see was the photograph, and the sudden, profound stillness that descended upon Elias Thorne. His stormy eyes, which had been assessing me with practiced detachment, widened, then narrowed, fixated on the image. His hand, which had been resting on the table, clenched into a fist. The cool composure shattered, replaced by a raw, unguarded vulnerability that was so unexpected, so profound, it felt like a physical blow. He reached for the photograph, his movements jerky, uncharacteristic. His fingers, usually so precise, trembled as they brushed against the worn edges. He picked it up, his gaze locked on the faded image. A wave of emotion, raw and potent, washed over his face, a tidal wave of pain and memory that I had only heard rumors about. And then, he looked up at me. The stormy sea in his eyes had calmed, but it was replaced by a tempest of a different kind, a tempest of shock, of disbelief, and something akin to a ghost of recognition. "Eleanor," he breathed, his voice barely a whisper, a sound I had never expected to hear from him. It was a sound that resonated with a deep, aching familiarity, a sound that stirred something deep within my own guarded heart. The world tilted on its axis. The man who had said he'd never love again. The man who was a legend of ruthlessness and isolation. He was looking at me, and in his eyes I saw not a titan of industry, but a man haunted by a past I was only just beginning to understand. And I knew, with a certainty that chilled me to the bone, that my carefully planned presentation had just taken a detour into uncharted, deeply personal territory. Eleanor? The name, wrenched from his lips, wasn't a question, but a raw, guttural gasp that seemed to rip through the carefully constructed silence of the boardroom. It was a sound I'd never imagined Elias Thorne capable of producing. A sound that spoke of shock, of disbelief, of a world irrevocably altered in the space of a heartbeat. My own heart, which had been performing a frantic, adrenaline-fueled drum solo against my ribs, faltered, then stuttered. The meticulous facade I'd erected for this crucial meeting, the practiced composure, the carefully rehearsed arguments for my fledgling proposal, it all crumbled. His eyes, those stormy, intense blue eyes that had held nothing but formidable assessment moments before, were now wide, disbelieving, and fixed on me with an intensity that bordered on primal. The controlled cascade of his dark hair, usually so impeccably styled, seemed to have a stubborn strand that had escaped its moorings, a subtle imperfection that mirrored the sudden, seismic shift in his demeanor. He looked undone. Utterly, terrifyingly undone. The photograph, still lying on the polished obsidian table between us, had been my undoing. It was a small, worn snapshot, tucked away in the back of my presentation binder, a relic from a life I thought I'd long since compartmentalized. It was of me, younger, with a wide, uninhibited smile, standing in front of a sun-drenched, slightly dilapidated house. Beside me, a smaller figure, barely visible, a child with a mop of dark hair, his face turned away from the camera. My younger brother, Leo. It was a picture I hadn't looked at in years, a reminder of a time before the crushing weight of responsibility, before the relentless pursuit of a future that had led me here, to this imposing room, to this man. And now it lay there, a silent, damning witness, bridging a chasm of time and memory I hadn't anticipated. Thorne's gaze flickered from the photograph to my face, then back again. His sculpted features, usually carved from granite, seemed to soften, to waver. The air, already thick with unspoken tension, now crackled with a different kind of energy, something more potent, more volatile. It was the charged silence that follows a thunderclap, the pregnant pause before the inevitable downpour. "You," he began, his voice rough, a stark contrast to the smooth, silken baritone I'd heard moments ago. He swallowed, his Adam's apple bobbing unnaturally. "You are Eleanor Vance?" The question was redundant. He had already spoken my name. But the tremor in his voice, the raw vulnerability it betrayed, was a physical blow. I felt a strange, unsettling kinship with this man, this titan of industry who had built an empire on an impenetrable emotional fortress. He was looking at me as if he were seeing a ghost. Or perhaps I was seeing one. My own hands, steady moments before, were now trembling uncontrollably. I clasped them together in my lap, the worn leather of my briefcase pressing against my thighs like a shield. "Yes," I managed, my voice barely a whisper. "I am Eleanor Vance." He stood then, a fluid, almost predatory movement that, paradoxically, seemed to be fueled by a deep uncertainty. He walked around the massive table, his footsteps silent on the thick carpet, his eyes never leaving my face. He stopped a few feet away, his shadow falling over me, and for the first time, I felt a primal fear. A fear that had nothing to do with my proposal, and everything to do with the ghost of the past that seemed to have materialized in this sterile, opulent boardroom. "It can't be," he murmured, more to himself than to me. He reached out a hand, his fingers hovering inches from my face, as if afraid to touch a mirage. Not you." The intensity of his gaze was overwhelming. It stripped away my professional persona, my carefully constructed defenses, and left me exposed. I saw a flicker of something in those stormy depths, a pain, a regret, a memory so potent it had the power to shatter his carefully cultivated detachment. It was like watching a granite mountain suddenly crack. "Mr. Thorne?" I began, my voice regaining a semblance of control, though it felt fragile, like a thin sheet of ice. "I understand this is unexpected, but I am here to present a proposal for—" He cut me off, a sharp, almost agitated gesture. "The proposal can wait. This cannot." He gestured vaguely towards the photograph, then back to me. "Who else knows you are here? Who sent you?" His questions were rapid fire, laced with an urgency that belied his usual measured demeanor. It was clear he wasn't interested in urban development anymore. His world had tilted on its axis, and I, Eleanor Vance, the ambitious consultant with the radical idea, was the epicenter. "No one sent me," I said, my voice firming. "I came on my own. My company, Vance Innovations, developed this proposal. It's my idea, my work." I picked up the photograph, my fingers brushing against the worn edges. It felt strangely warm in my hand. This is just a personal memento. It has no bearing on my professional capacity." He scoffed, a harsh, disbelieving sound. "A personal memento? That child—" He trailed off, his gaze fixed on the small figure in the background. "That child is—" I hesitated. The question hung in the air, heavy with unspoken implications. To acknowledge Leo was to acknowledge a past I had tried to bury. But his eyes, so raw, so unguarded, compelled me. "That is my younger brother, Leo," I said softly. A muscle in his jaw twitched. He turned away from me then, walking slowly towards the floor-to-ceiling window that offered a panoramic view of the sprawling city. He stood with his back to me, a silhouette against the muted light of the afternoon sun, his hands clasped behind him. The silence stretched, thick and suffocating. I could feel the weight of his gaze, even with his back to me, as if he were dissecting me with his thoughts. "Leo," he repeated, the name a soft exhalation. He turned back, his expression unreadable for a moment, before a flicker of something. Recognition? Pain? Crossed his features. He would be, what, 25 now? My breath hitched. How could he possibly know that? "He would be," I confirmed, my voice barely audible. He walked back towards the table, his movements more deliberate now, the raw shock replaced by a chilling, controlled intensity. He picked up the photograph, his fingers tracing the outline of Leo's small, turned-away figure. He didn't look at me, but I could feel his focus sharpening, honing in on the details I had long since tried to forget. "I remember him," he said, his voice low and resonant, a stark contrast to the earlier rasp. "He was always chasing after you, wasn't he? A shadow at your heels." He finally met my eyes, and the intensity was back. But now it was different. It was laced with a profound sadness, a shared grief that seemed to emanate from him like a physical force. "He loved that battered old swing set in your backyard. Used to spend hours on it." My knees felt weak. The cold, imposing boardroom, the intimidating titan of industry, it all faded. I was no longer Eleanor Vance, the ambitious consultant. I was a young girl again, with scraped knees and a younger brother who idolized her. And Elias Thorne, the man who had built an impenetrable emotional fortress, was somehow, impossibly, a part of that memory. You knew my family?" I stammered, the question a desperate attempt to make sense of the impossible. A ghost of a smile, a sad, weary thing, touched his lips. "I knew your family, Eleanor. I knew them very well. More than you know." He looked down at the photograph again, his gaze lingering on the small, obscured figure. "He was a good kid, Leo. Full of life." The words hung in the air, heavy with unspoken history. My mind raced, trying to reconcile the Elias Thorne of legend, the ruthless, heartless mogul, with the man standing before me, a man haunted by a past that mirrored my own. He had said he'd never love again. Had that vow been born from a tragedy connected to my family? To Leo? "How?" I whispered, the single word encompassing a universe of questions. How did he know Leo? How did he know about the swing set? How could he be looking at me with such profound, familiar pain? He finally dropped the photograph back onto the table, the sound a small, definitive click that echoed in the vastness of the room. He looked directly at me, and for the first time, I saw not the impenetrable CEO, but a man etched with a history I was only beginning to comprehend. "It was a long time ago, Eleanor," he said, his voice softer now, laced with a weariness that seemed to seep from his very bones. "Before Thorn Industries. Before the Empire. Before the vow." He paused, his gaze sweeping over my face, lingering on my eyes. "Before you walked into my life and shattered it all, just like this." He gestured between me and the photograph, a subtle, almost unconscious movement. The air in the room had shifted once more. The professional pitch was forgotten, irrelevant. We were no longer adversaries in the arena of business. We were two people adrift in a sea of shared, painful memories, a sea that had suddenly, violently, surged to the surface. "I don't understand," I said, my voice trembling. The carefully constructed walls around my own heart began to fracture. He took a step closer, his eyes holding mine. The intensity was still there, but it was no longer intimidating. It was raw, unguarded vulnerability, a stark contrast to the man I had expected. "You don't remember me, do you?" he asked, the question laced with a profound, almost childlike sadness. "After all these years, you don't remember Elias." The name, spoken with such quiet desperation, struck me like a physical blow. Elias, not Mr. Thorne. Elias. A name I hadn't heard in decades, a name that belonged to a whispered memory, a hazy, sun-drenched summer, a warm, gentle hand. My breath caught in my throat. The hazy summer, the gentle hand. The boy who had taught me how to skip stones on the lake. The boy who had shared his secrets and his dreams with me under the vast, indifferent sky. The boy who had disappeared from my life as suddenly as he had entered it, leaving behind only a hollow ache and a profound sense of loss. My mind reeled, struggling to reconcile the image of the boy with the formidable man standing before me. The sharp angles of his jaw, the intensity of his eyes, the sheer power that radiated from him. It was all so different. Yet beneath the layers of time and success and heartbreak, I could see him. The ghost of the boy I had once known. "Elias," I whispered, the name feeling foreign and yet achingly familiar on my tongue. A slow, almost imperceptible nod. Tears, shimmering and unshed, welled in his stormy blue eyes. "Yes, Eleanor, it's me." The world tilted again, and this time I didn't fight it. The polished obsidian table, the panoramic cityscape, the imposing boardroom, they all dissolved into a swirling vortex of memory and emotion. The proposal, my career, my carefully planned future, it all became insignificant. Because in that moment, standing in the heart of Elias Thorne's empire, I was no longer just a consultant. I was Eleanor, and he was Elias. And the past, with all its ghosts and its unhealed wounds, had finally, irrevocably, found us. The man who said he'd never love again was standing before me, and the reason was me, or rather the me that used to be. And in his eyes, I saw not the cold, calculating CEO, but the echo of a boy who had loved me, and whom I had loved in return, before life had torn us apart. The silence that followed was no longer tense, but heavy with the weight of 1,000 unspoken words, 1,000 shared memories, 1,000 questions that had languished unanswered for far too long. My whisper was barely audible, a fragile thread of sound in the vast, hushed expanse of the boardroom. Elias. The name, spoken aloud after so many years, felt foreign and yet achingly familiar on my tongue. It hung in the air between us, a tangible weight, heavy with unspoken history. His stormy eyes locked onto mine, the practiced detachment that had initially held me captive, now replaced by a tempest of a different kind. A raw, unguarded vulnerability that cracked through the granite mountain of his composure. It was a physical blow, stealing the air from my lungs, a visceral jolt that resonated deep within me. He took a step closer, his movements jerky, uncharacteristic for a man who usually moved with the calculated precision of a chess grandmaster. The polished obsidian table gleamed between us, a stark, cold barrier that suddenly felt inadequate to contain the resurfacing storm. His gaze, which had been so intensely blue, seemed to deepen, to swirl with a turmoil I hadn't seen in the boy I remembered, or the formidable man he had become. "You remember," he stated, his voice a low baritone, rough around the edges, stripped of its usual silken smoothness. It was a confession, a plea, an accusation all rolled into one. I nodded, unable to speak, my throat tight with a mixture of shock and a dawning, terrifying realization. The boy who had been my older brother's shadow, the lanky teenager with a shy smile and eyes that held a similar, though less tempestuous shade of blue, was standing before me, a titan forged in steel and ambition, yet haunted by a past I had inadvertently unearthed. "You grew up," he continued, a ghost of a smile touching his lips, a smile that held no humor, only a profound, bone-deep sadness. "You changed. So did you," I managed, my voice a little stronger now, though still trembling. The binder lay forgotten on the floor, its contents scattered like fallen leaves. But the photograph, the catalyst, remained on the table, a silent witness to the unraveling of years. "Leo told me. He told me you were different now, that you built all this." My gaze swept over the expansive room, the panoramic cityscape a stark reminder of the empire he had constructed. He scoffed, a harsh, dry sound. "Built it on the ashes of everything that mattered." He looked down at the photograph, his fingers hovering inches above the image of a younger Leo, his arms slung around a beaming, gap-toothed me. "Your brother. He was a good kid, Eleanor. Too good for this world." The words struck a chord, a familiar ache that had never truly subsided since Leo's accident. He had been my protector, my confidant, the one constant in a childhood that had often felt adrift. And Elias had been a witness to our small, sun-drenched world. "He loved you," I said, the memory of Leo's earnest pronouncements about Elias flooding my mind. Leo had idolized him, spoken of his intelligence, his kindness, even when Elias himself seemed to retreat into a shell of adolescent angst. Elias flinched, a subtle tremor that rippled through his broad shoulders. "And I loved him," he admitted, the words heavy with a pain that seemed to have festered for decades. He was the only light I had for a long time." The silence that followed was pregnant with regret, with loss, with the weight of a shared history that had been buried so deep. I had convinced myself it was gone forever. I had walked into this boardroom armed with a proposal, a meticulously researched plan for sustainable urban development, a radical idea that I believed could change the world. I had expected a battle of intellects, a negotiation, perhaps even an outright rejection. I had not expected to confront the ghost of my past, to find the man who had built an impenetrable emotional fortress responsible for my brother's death. "I never knew," I whispered, the full weight of it crashing down on me. "Leo, he never told me that you were involved, that you were there." Elias finally met my gaze again, his eyes a turbulent sea. "There were things, people involved, that Leo didn't understand, and I couldn't explain. Not then. Not ever, I thought." He ran a hand through his impeccably styled dark hair, a gesture of contained frustration. After Leo was gone, I made a choice, a promise. My heart hammered against my ribs. I knew the promise he was referring to. The whispers, the rumors that had followed him for years, a dark cloud over his meteoric rise. Elias Thorne would never love again. You promised never to love again? The question was a raw, exposed nerve. He gave a short, sharp nod. Because I couldn't bear to lose someone like that again. Because the pain, Eleanor, the pain was unbearable. And I saw how easily everything good could be shattered. His gaze flickered back to the photograph, to Leo's smiling face. I thought if I built walls, impenetrable walls, I could protect myself. I convinced myself that love was a weakness, a vulnerability I couldn't afford. And then you walked in here, holding that photograph, and for a moment, for a terrifying, glorious moment, those walls felt like they were crumbling. The confession hung in the air, raw and devastating. He had built his empire, his reputation, his entire existence on a foundation of grief and a vow of emotional abstinence, and here I was, a walking, breathing reminder of the very thing he had tried so desperately to outrun. I don't understand, I said, my voice barely a breath. Leo, he was my brother. You knew him. How could you have just disappeared? How could you not have reached out? Reaching out would have meant acknowledging the pain, Elias said, his voice low and strained. It would have meant facing the guilt. I was a kid, Eleanor, a scared kid. And then I became a man who was too afraid to feel anything. Leo was my best friend. And I failed him. When he died, a part of me died too. And I swore I would never let anyone get close enough to inflict that kind of wound again. He looked away, staring out at the city, his profile sharp and hard against the muted light filtering through the massive windows. The silhouette of Elias Thorne, the man who held the world in his hands, was a figure of immense power. Yet in this moment, he was also a figure of profound, agonizing loneliness. The boy I remembered, the one Leo had spoken of with such affection, was still in there, buried beneath layers of success and sorrow. But you didn't fail him, I found myself saying, the words escaping before I could censor them. Leo wouldn't have wanted that for you. He wouldn't have wanted you to shut yourself off from the world, from happiness. His jaw tightened, a muscle twitching. Happiness. The word was laced with a bitter irony. I don't know what that is anymore, Eleanor. Not real happiness. Not the kind that doesn't come with a price tag of unbearable loss. The raw honesty in his voice was disarming. It stripped away the veneer of the ruthless businessman, revealing the wounded boy beneath. My own carefully constructed professional armor began to feel brittle, inadequate. This wasn't just a business meeting anymore. This was a reckoning. Leo, he always talked about you, about your dreams, about how you were going to change the world together. My voice cracked. He believed in you, Elias. He believed in us. He turned back, his gaze intense, searching. And I believed in him. He was the one constant, the one good thing. Then he was gone, and I was left with this. He gestured vaguely to the opulent boardroom, to the empire that surrounded them. This hollow victory, this self-imposed exile. The weight of the past settled over us, a palpable entity. The proposal for sustainable urban development, once the sole focus of my mission, now seemed a distant, almost irrelevant concern. We were standing on the precipice of something far more significant, a chasm of unresolved emotions and shared history that threatened to swallow us whole. I didn't come here to dredge all this up, I admitted, my voice barely a whisper. I came with a proposal. My company. We have an idea for revitalizing neglected urban spaces, sustainable community-focused development. It's ambitious, I know, but I believe it could make a real difference. I gestured vaguely towards the scattered papers. It's a different kind of building, I suppose. Building for the future, not just for profit. Elias's gaze softened, a flicker of interest, perhaps, in the consultant I was supposed to be. He picked up a single sheet of paper, the embossed letterhead of my company stark against the dark wood of the table. He scanned it, his expression unreadable, but the intensity in his eyes remained. Sustainable development, he murmured, the words rolling off his tongue with a practiced ease that belied the emotional turmoil of moments before. Community-focused. You always did have a good heart, Eleanor. And Leo always said you had a mind for seeing what others missed. He looked at me, and for the first time, I saw a glimmer of recognition that wasn't solely tied to the painful past. It was the recognition of the bright, curious girl he had known, the one who had chased butterflies with her brother and dreamed of a better world. The boy you remember, I said, my voice gaining a steady resolve, is still here, and he's still trying to make a difference. Elias Thorne, the man who had vowed never to love again, met my gaze. The icy grip of his past was still present, a dark shadow, but for the first time, a sliver of light seemed to penetrate the impenetrable fortress he had built around his heart. The meeting had taken an entirely unexpected turn, a detour into uncharted, deeply personal territory, and I knew, with a certainty that both thrilled and terrified me, that neither of us would ever be the same. The storm outside the panoramic windows mirrored the one brewing within, a tempest of a different kind, one that had been waiting decades to break. The air in the boardroom, moments before thick with the cloying scent of expensive cologne and the silent hum of ambition, had shifted. It was no longer just about market shares and projected growth. The polished obsidian table gleamed, reflecting the muted light from the panoramic cityscape. But my focus was solely on Elias Thorne. His practiced composure had fractured, revealing a raw, unguarded vulnerability that was as startling as a physical blow. The photograph, clutched now in his hand, was a relic from a life I thought I had buried, a life I had deliberately compartmentalized. His voice, usually a low baritone, resonant and controlled, was rough, almost a whisper. "Leo," he breathed, the name a ghost on his tongue. It was the first time he had spoken his name, the name of the boy who had been my brother, in all but blood, the boy whose laughter used to echo through the summers of our youth. Seeing Elias Thorne, the titan who commanded empires, reduced to this raw, exposed state by a faded snapshot, was disorienting. My own hands trembled, the tremor I'd fought to suppress throughout the meeting, now a full-blown quake. The professional facade I'd so carefully constructed crumbled around me. This wasn't a business meeting anymore. This was an excavation of a shared past, a past I had navigated with a carefully curated grief, a past he had seemingly locked away in an impenetrable vault. "You knew him," I managed, my voice barely audible. It was a foolish question. The look on his face, the way his eyes, the color of a stormy sea, had widened and then filled with an emotion I couldn't quite decipher. Pain, regret, something akin to awe, confirmed it. He knew Leo. And he knew me. His gaze lifted from the photograph to mine, and for the first time, I saw past the granite facade, past the legend. I saw the boy who had once shared secrets with Leo under the vast expanse of a summer sky. Knew him? He let out a short, humorless laugh, a sound that scraped against the silence. Leo was everything. The words hung in the air, heavy with unspoken history. Everything. That was it, wasn't it? Leo had been everything to Elias, just as he had been everything to me. And then, he was gone. And Elias Thorne The boy I remembered as laughing easily had vanished, replaced by this man who had built a fortress around his heart. He was my best friend, Elias continued, his voice regaining a fraction of its control, but the tremor remained, a subtle vibration beneath the surface. We were inseparable, since we were, 10? 10. That sounded about right. I remembered Elias as a gangly, restless boy who was always at our house, his energy a constant counterpoint to Leo's quieter, more contemplative nature. They were an unlikely pair, but their bond was fierce, unbreakable. Or so I had thought. I haven't seen you since we were kids, I said, the words tumbling out in a rush. I didn't know you became Elias Thorne. The Elias Thorne. He gave a curt nod, his eyes still fixed on the photograph. Life takes unexpected turns. The understatement was immense. Life had taken Leo, and in doing so had irrevocably altered the course of his own. And you never looked for me? The question was out before I could stop it, laced with a residual hurt I hadn't realized I still carried. Elias's gaze snapped back to me, sharp and piercing. Look for you? Why would I look for you, Eleanor? There was a subtle shift in his tone, a guardedness returning. He was pulling back, the momentary crack in his armor sealing itself. Because Leo was your best friend, I countered, my own voice hardening slightly. And I was his sister. We were a unit, Elias. You, Leo, and me. We were the three musketeers. The memory brought a pang of bittersweet nostalgia. We had been. Before the silence descended, before the emptiness swallowed everything. He flinched at the mention of the three musketeers. It was a ghost from their shared past, a reminder of a time before the tragedy. That was a long time ago, Eleanor, a different lifetime. But it happened, I insisted, my professional mission forgotten. This was more important. And you built all of this, I gestured around the opulent boardroom, and you never once thought about the people who were part of that other lifetime? His jaw tightened. I thought about it every single day, and I made a choice to move forward, to build something that couldn't be taken away. He tapped the photograph with a finger, the gesture suddenly rough, almost violent. Leo was taken, and I swore to myself. I swore I would never let anything, or anyone, have that kind of power over me again. The words landed like a pronouncement, a chilling refrain of his past pain. He had built his empire, his impregnable fortress, on the ashes of his grief. And the vow he had made, the vow that had shaped him into the man I face today, was to never love again. A profound sadness washed over me. I saw the boy I remembered, the boy who had lost his dearest friend, and I understood, on a visceral level, the depth of his pain. But I also saw the waste of it, the years spent in self-imposed exile. And that's why you're Elias Thorne, I said softly, the man who never loved again. He didn't answer, his gaze distant, lost in the labyrinth of his memories. The silence stretched, broken only by the distant hum of the city below. I felt a strange pull, a desire to shatter the meticulously constructed walls he had erected. He had built them to protect himself, but they had also imprisoned him. I came here with a proposal, Elias, I began, my voice regaining a touch of its professional edge, though the tremor was still there. A proposal for sustainable urban development. It's a radical idea, but I believe it could genuinely change things. For the better. He finally tore his gaze away from the photograph and looked at me, his eyes no longer holding the raw pain, but a sharp, assessing glint. Radical ideas are my specialty, Eleanor. I built my empire on them. He paused, a slow, almost predatory smile touching his lips. It was the smile I had anticipated, the one as sharp as a diamond. But you're not here to talk about urban development anymore, are you? The question hung in the air, a challenge. He knew. He knew that the carefully constructed boundaries between us had been obliterated by a single photograph, by the ghosts of our shared past. No, I admitted, my voice barely a whisper. I'm not. He leaned back in his chair, the movement fluid and controlled, a stark contrast to the raw emotion he had just displayed. The photograph, still in his hand, seemed to be a tangible link to a past he had tried so hard to disown. So, tell me, Eleanor, he said, his voice low and measured. What exactly do you expect to gain by walking into my boardroom with a ghost? The question was loaded, accusatory, and yet undeniably honest. He was acknowledging the spectral presence that had entered the room with me, the presence that had stripped away his defenses. I don't know, Elias, I confessed, the truth raw and unvarnished. Maybe I expected to find the boy who used to race Leo to the top of the oak tree. Maybe I expected something other than this. I gestured vaguely between us, at the gulf that had opened up, a gulf filled with years of silence and unspoken pain. He studied me, his expression unreadable. The boy is gone, Eleanor. Buried. What you see is what's left. But Leo isn't buried, I said, my voice firm. And neither is the memory of what you had, what you lost. I met his gaze directly, refusing to be intimidated. You can't build an empire on a foundation of denial, Elias. It's not sustainable. The irony of my own words wasn't lost on me. A flicker of something. Surprise? Annoyance? Crossed his face. He placed the photograph carefully on the polished obsidian table, as if it were a fragile, dangerous artifact. You think you understand, he stated, not as a question, but as a fact. I understand loss, I replied, my voice steady. And I understand how it can change a person, but I also believe that healing is possible, that moving forward doesn't mean forgetting. It means integrating. He let out a soft sigh, a sound that seemed to carry the weight of years. Integrating. A neat, tidy word for the messiest of human emotions. He ran a hand through his impeccably styled hair, a gesture that was surprisingly human, almost weary. You're right, Eleanor. You're right about Leo. He was the best of us. The best of me. His admission, quiet and tinged with regret, felt like a victory. Not a victory over him, but a victory for the memory of Leo, for the lost innocence of our childhood. And you blame yourself, I said, the words a gentle probe, for what happened to him. His eyes narrowed, a shadow passing over them. That's a dangerous path, Eleanor. One I don't tread lightly. But you do tread it. I pressed on, my own fear momentarily forgotten, replaced by a fierce determination to understand. What happened, Elias? What happened that day? He stood up, his tall frame casting a long shadow across the room. He walked to the floor-to-ceiling windows, his back to me, and stared out at the sprawling metropolis. The city, his kingdom, lay spread out before him. It's a long story, Eleanor, he said, his voice distant. A story I haven't told anyone, not in 30 years. And yet, I said, my voice soft but firm, you're about to tell me. He turned, and in the muted light, his face was etched with a profound sadness that went beyond anything I had ever imagined. The man who had sworn never to love again was standing before me. A man haunted by a past he could no longer outrun. The proposal for sustainable urban development was a distant memory. We were standing on the precipice of a different kind of excavation, one that promised to unearth